You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is the Laurie Show case. Now this one should have been an open and closed case, but the amount of deception made it far more complicated than you would ever expect. By the way, for Suspect Summer, I post so much content in the month of July, so if that's something you were interested in, make sure you are subscribed. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1991 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, a place where there hadn't been a murder in 10 years. Laurie Show was a 16-year-old sophomore in high school at the Conestoga Valley High School. Now, Laurie had always been a giving girl. She loved her family, she tutored other kids, she went to Bible school and Sunday school, and she was just all around a very wonderful individual. But unfortunately, her young life would be cut short. Then it was December 20th of 1991, and Laurie was getting ready for school when her mother Hazel headed out before her. Her mother had an interview or a meeting with Laurie's counselor at school that they had set up, and so Hazel was going to go by herself while Laurie got ready for school. However, this counselor never showed up to meet Hazel, and so she decided to head home. When she got there, she was actually stopped by a neighbor who said that there had been some noise coming from the Show's apartment, but Hazel just thought, Laurie could be a very loud person. She was a teenager, probably had some music on, and so she wasn't thinking much of it as she walked into their apartment. The lights were on, so she called out for Laurie, and there was no answer, and she walked into Laurie's bathroom. She wasn't there. And then she walked into her bedroom, where she found her in a pool of her own blood with a rope tied around her neck. Hazel immediately ran to the kitchen to get a knife, and then she took it back to Laurie, cut the rope off of her neck, but then found that there was a giant gash on her neck where the rope had been. Hazel immediately grabbed Laurie in her arms and basically held her together as she began to sob. But Laurie had not had her final word yet, because she then began to tell her mother, "Michelle did it. Michelle did it," over and over again. Her mother Hazel told her that she was in God's hands now and was basically telling her goodbye. Laurie had a 5-inch gash to the throat and stab wounds that had punctured her lung and grazed her spine. She had several wounds to the head and multiple defense wounds, but thankfully her mother Hazel knew exactly who this Michelle was. Her real name was Lisa Michelle Lambert, a 19-year-old who had previously threatened Laurie's life. Now, there was an arrest warrant put out for Lisa Michelle Lambert, and they could not find her for several hours. And then she was spotted at a local bowling alley called Garden Spot with her best friend named Tabitha Buck and her boyfriend named Lawrence Butch Yuckin. All three were arrested and brought in for questioning at that point, because you see, back in June, Michelle had begun to stalk Laurie. You see, Michelle had allegedly moved out of her house at 15 years old because she had been stealing from her parents, and obviously they didn't approve of that, and there was just a whole bunch of fights going on. So allegedly she had moved out and moved in with her boyfriend Lawrence into a trailer. However, that summer, they had been taking a break, or so he said, and he had been seeing a girl named, that's right, Laurie Show. Laurie and Lawrence had gone on a few dates, but it pretty much ended after Laurie told her mother that she had actually been sexually assaulted by Lawrence, and so the dates pretty much ended after that. But throughout this whole time that they were dating, and even a little bit afterwards, Laurie had been getting phone calls to her home from Michelle, who was threatening her life, saying horrendous things, and also saying that she was pregnant with Lawrence's baby. Michelle was furious at Laurie and even showed up at Laurie's job at a local dress shop to verbally assault her. Michelle believed Laurie had completely ruined her life and was so completely furious with her, and would relentlessly call their home phone until somebody picked up, only to scream at them. Eventually the Shows had to change their number because of this, and after a week of Laurie and Lawrence dating, they no longer went on dates anymore, and Lawrence went back to Michelle. However, the abuse did not end there, and in November it would escalate to Michelle physically assaulting Laurie. Now, Laurie did not go and file a police report against Lawrence for the sexual assault because she didn't want Michelle to get even more angry, and yet that is exactly what she did. Now, at this point in November, Laurie was outside of the mall talking to some of her friends when Michelle and Lawrence drove by and saw her. At this point, Michelle got out of her car, went up to Laurie, slapped her, and then began to bang her head against a truck. Michelle said, "If something happens to my baby, I'm going to kill you." And the next month, she would do that very thing. You see, Michelle had a pretty big mouth about it all too. She was telling her friends of her plans to kidnap Laurie, take her to the city, and slit her throat. Now, when the three were brought in for questioning from the bowling alley, Lawrence was the first one to really talk, and he said at 6:30 a.m. that morning, he had taken Michelle and her friend Tabitha to Laurie's house. But he did not know of exactly what was going to happen. He in fact thought, or said he thought, it was just a prank and then they were going to pull a knife on her and scare her. But he dropped them off there and went to a local restaurant. He said that he just thought that they were going to cut her hair to make her uncomfortable, but then he went on to McDonald's and returned 15 minutes later. However, it was found he wasn't as innocent as he appeared to be because he had covered for them with an alibi and disposed of evidence later on. He had in fact brought the two back to his house or his trailer, washed their clothes, and disposed of the murder weapon in the Susquehanna River. Now, Tabitha, Michelle's friend, was only 17 years old at this time, but when they arrested her, had a gash on her cheek. Now, when investigators asked her what this was from, Michelle intervened, didn't let her talk, and said that they had gotten into a fight that morning with some Hispanic girls. Now, Tabitha wasn't talking, Michelle was lying, and Lawrence was actually a pretty big talker. He continued by saying that Michelle had told him that that day they hadn't actually gone in to kill her, but they had accidentally stabbed her in the back and then only slit her throat to put her out of pain. However, the previous night, Lawrence had taken Michelle to Kmart to get ropes, ski masks, and gloves. Now, these disposed clothes were found that Michelle and Tabitha were wearing that morning, and it pretty much made Michelle's statement completely crumble. You see, she had said she wasn't the one that did it, that Tabitha was the one who initiated it all, who stabbed her, but the stains on Michelle's clothes proved otherwise. Now, instead of Michelle giving up the lies at this point, she began to turn it on Tabitha, saying she only wanted to talk to Laurie, but Tabitha was the one who was aggressive towards Laurie and attacked her, and Michelle was scared of Tabitha, so she went along with it. Now, when this didn't work, she went on to blaming Lawrence, saying that he was the reason she did it all, that he was abusive and manipulative, and told her that she had to kill Laurie. Now, police thankfully saw through this deception and charged both Tabitha and Michelle with murder. And while Michelle was awaiting this murder trial, she gave birth to a little baby girl named Christine, who was then given to her parents to take care of. Now, Lawrence wasn't being charged for murder if he would give a testimony against Michelle, because there had been multiple witnesses, one at McDonald's saying he was there that morning, and another saying that they only saw two girls at the show residence and not a man, which would exclude him from being there at the time of the murder. However, while in jail, Michelle had wrote Lawrence a series of 29 questions, saying things like, "If I take the blame, are you sure I'll get less time?" And he responded yes. And there were many different questions that almost appeared as though Michelle was trying to get him to confess to something, but whether he was actually confessing to what he had done or whether he was being manipulated into confessing, it's not really clear, because the questions were almost like on those tests that are trying to confuse you and word things differently so you say the wrong answer when you know the right one. That's kind of how it appeared. However, after these came out and it made Lawrence look very guilty, he said all of his answers had been forged, but a handwriting analysis showed that it hadn't been. He had actually written those answers. Michelle had even conveniently said on one of these letters, "I know I'm not an angel, but Lawrence, I never got mad enough to kill." But Michelle was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, and apparently the judge spared her the death penalty because she had no previous criminal record and also because of her baby. But because Lawrence lied about actually writing these letters to Michelle, his plea deal was completely overturned and he pled no contest to first-degree murder, which got him 10 to 20 years. Unfortunately, this is not where this case ends, because a few months into Michelle's stay at the prison, she claimed she had been sexually assaulted by one of the police officers and was transferred to another prison. And this would begin a whole spiral of things that would ultimately lead to the most baffling part of this case. Because 5 years later, after Michelle had tried many different appeals to get out of prison, she tried a different means of release. And she had claimed that she had been framed for Laurie's murder by police officers who had previously gang raped her. This was a habeas corpus, and a Philadelphia lawyer decided to take on this case because she saw that there were definitely things in the case that were overlooked. Like when Lawrence had told a co-worker that he actually would not return the next day because he was going to murder a girl. This was never brought up in the first case, and this lawyer didn't understand why he wasn't actually charged and was just given this plea deal immediately. Now, allegedly, after looking into the first case, 200 errors had been made, and so in 1997, a new trial would go to court. And this time, Michelle, who had previously dyed her hair platinum blonde, had blue contacts, had changed to a brunette with just brown eyes, and this was said to be because it made her seem a lot more innocent, and this would make a big difference. Now, during this trial, a huge piece of information would come forward, and that was from Laurie's mother herself, who would say that she actually did come forward to a police officer near the time of her daughter's murder, saying that she had seen Lawrence that morning near her apartment, but this officer told her to keep it quiet and not tell anyone else. Because of this, the judge immediately released Michelle from prison and forbade the state of Pennsylvania from ever retrying her. After this, an impeachment petition was actually made for this judge because many people did not agree with his decision. So 10 months later, Michelle would be back in jail after 10 months of being free, and this was because of the Federal Appeals Panel. The third trial was in May of 1988, and finally Tabitha Buck, Michelle's friend, was ready to tell her side of the story, because before then Tabitha hadn't said anything. Tabitha claimed she did hold Laurie down, but it was Michelle who attacked her, that Laurie was already down when Michelle kneed down and sawed her throat like a loaf of bread. Tabitha also said that Lawrence was never in the apartment. However, now Michelle was coming up with a different story, saying that Lawrence was the one who attacked Laurie and she was trying to defend Laurie from him. Then there was a letter found from Michelle to Lawrence that described this murder in a poem. Now, Michelle had gotten these trials originally because of the sexual assault allegations. However, one of those allegations was actually found to be false because the male she had accused on the exact date was on a honeymoon and had all of the paperwork to prove that he was there and far away from her. Now, I'm not discounting by any means that these other men could have sexually assaulted Michelle, and I'm just saying that this is one account that showed that she was not always truthful. That August, her guilty verdict was upheld, and by 2005, all of her appeals were exhausted. Now, Hazel Show, Laurie's mother, campaigned for better anti-stalking laws in the state of Pennsylvania, and by June of 1993, she got that very wish. Now, in 2007, Michelle actually sued for assault by police officers and got a $35,000 settlement. But in 2017, Tabitha was actually resentenced to 28 to life in prison, and she could possibly get out this December. And Lawrence was actually granted parole in 2003. But one of the biggest questions in this case was, could Laurie Show have actually identified her killer in her mother's arms? Doctors, some say that she could, some say she couldn't because of the gash in her neck. Now, by the time paramedics got there, she had already passed. And some say that she possibly could have had just enough life in her to say Michelle did it to her mother, but others say that there was not a chance, that she would have already been dead, and definitely if she wasn't dead, could not have spoken. But even if Laurie hadn't said the word Michelle, Michelle had been threatening her for months. And that says a lot. Now, I don't have any doubt that Tabitha and Lawrence had something to do with it and probably helped, but I do believe that Michelle was the instigator, and it would have never happened without her. Now, watching Michelle's interviews about this entire thing and about trying to get appeals and about Laurie's murder, and seeing the lack of emotion in her face, the almost dead look in her eyes, the fact that she would constantly lie, change her stories, that she was very persuasive about what she was saying, that you almost believe she was telling the truth even if you knew she wasn't, that is all signs of a sociopath. And watching those interviews from someone who has been very close to a sociopath and knows that kind of behavior, I want to say 100% that she needs a lot of help and is very capable of doing what was done to Laurie Show. Michelle even went on to write a book called Love, Murder, and Corruption in Lancaster County, My Story, as though she is some sort of victim in this scenario. But I wanted to tell this story because I got it requested to me, but as I looked into it, I truly believe it is such a good thing to know, and for young girls, young boys, anyone who is young or even old to remember that this is not normal behavior. Bullying and stalking and being verbally or physically abused is not okay in any scenario, and you deserve to get help. You know, I think that Laurie was so incredibly scared that she never went to the police at first about the sexual assault from Lawrence. That wasn't acceptable either. And I'm not blaming her whatsoever for not being able to go. That's hard, and that is not something that is just an easy thing to talk yourself into. But I do always want to put that little seed of a thought in all of your heads that you deserve that help. You deserve to have them know that you are the powerful one. They do not hold that power over you. Even if they scare you, you deserve that justice. You deserve to tell people what's happening to you and to have help. It's not dramatic, it's not unnecessary. These kind of things could save your life if you can report it, if you can get that help before it's too late. So, and even if it's not happening to you, it's happening to somebody else, and you're afraid of what they'll say if you feel in your gut that it needs to be told to somebody, make sure to go ahead and do it, because it will always be a better outcome than if they unfortunately had their lives taken and you can't get that back. You can't get them back. So please don't ever be scared to say what you need to say and to get help, because you are worthy of that. And I hope that that's what you got from this case. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.